Born in 1872 to a Jewish family in Paris, Léon Blum excelled as a literary critic and scholar, briefly attending the École Normale Supérieure before studying law. By 1895, he joined the Conseil d'État, a prestigious French government body advising on laws and serving as a high administrative court, while mingling with literary figures like André Gide. The Dreyfus Affair, a scandal where a Jewish army officer was wrongly convicted of treason, exposing rampant anti-Semitism, pushed Blum toward socialism, inspired by Jean Jaurès's moral vision over revolutionary dogma. Advocating reform over violence, he faced criticism from radicals for his caution, while his Jewish heritage drew vicious anti-Semitic attacks from the right. During World War I, Blum served in the cabinet of Marcel Sembat, gaining political experience in a fractured nation. Elected a deputy in 1919, he rose as a leader of the SFIO Socialist Party, defending democratic socialism at the 1920 Tours Congress against Bolshevik influences. His moderate stance deepened divides with the revolutionary left, yet positioned him as a key figure in a turbulent era, ready to face France's growing challenges. As World War II erupted, Blum's pre-war policies came under scrutiny, with critics linking them to France's defeat. Arrested by the Vichy regime in 1940, he was tried at Riom in 1942, where collaborators accused him and other Republic leaders of causing the 1940 defeat through weakness and pacifism. A political show trial aimed at discrediting the left. Blum defended the Republic vigorously, turning the proceedings against Vichy, but the trial was suspended as it backfired. Deported to Buchenwald in 1943, Blum endured harsh conditions, writing reflections on socialism and democracy, including L'Échelle Humaine. His survival and return in 1945 made him a symbol for socialists in the resistance, though debates persisted over his earlier decisions. Post-war, he briefly served as Prime Minister again in 1946-1947, navigating Reconstruction and the early Cold War. Blum's death closed a life marked by idealism and controversy, inviting reflection on his key legacies, the Popular Front's social experiments, his stance on fascism amid accusations of both pacifism and bellicism, and the foundations he laid for Europe's welfare state. In 1936, Léon Blum led the Popular Front, a shaky coalition of socialists, communists, and radicals to electoral victory, promising to tackle France's economic crisis and rising fascism. The coalition, born from massive protests against far-right riots in 1934, aimed to unify the left, but it exposed a bitter internal war. Blum, heading the Socialist Party, SFIO, championed reform within capitalism, clashing with the revolutionary left communists aligned with Moscow and radical socialists who demanded a full socialist overhaul. When 2 million workers launched strikes and occupied factories in June 1936, Blum was forced into the Matignon Agreements, granting a 12% wage hike, 2-week paid vacations, and a 40-hour work week. These measures, hailed as victories, were concessions wrested by unions and radicals, not initiatives Blum sought. The revolutionary left accused him of taming worker militancy to preserve order, while the right branded him a communist puppet, fueling anti-Semitic attacks. These reforms marked a turning point, planting the seeds of Europe's welfare state by prioritizing workers' rights and dignity. The Front's economic failure is dissected differently by major economic schools. Keynesians argue Blum's wage hikes and work-sharing aimed to boost demand but lacked robust public investments, unlike the New Deal, leading to inflation without growth. Neoclassical liberals see the reforms as market distortions, raising costs and unemployment by stifling business flexibility. Marxists condemn Blum's moderation for preserving capitalism, allowing bosses to sabotage reforms through capital flight. Austrians blame artificial wage mandates for creating unsustainable booms, devaluing the franc. Institutionalists fault poor coordination with unions and businesses, causing strikes and chaos absent in Britain's gradual reforms. These critiques reveal a common thread. Blum's well-meaning policies, pushed by radical pressure, sparked inflation, alienated small businesses, and deepened divisions, collapsing his government by 1937 and exposing the fragile balance of social reform in a divided nation. As fascism rose in Europe during the 1930s, Léon Blum navigated a storm of criticism. The far left accused him of excessive pacifism for not intervening boldly against dictators, while the far right labeled him Blum Laguerre for his rearmament efforts and anti-fascist rhetoric, claiming he was provoking conflict. This paradox defined his foreign policy, balancing idealism with pragmatism in a divided France. During the Spanish Civil War, 1936-1939, Blum initially approved covert arms shipments to the Republican government against Franco's nationalists, but quickly adopted official non-intervention through a European pact, fearing escalation into a broader war. This decision, influenced by British pressure and domestic divisions, frustrated the radical left, who saw it as abandoning anti-fascists, while the right criticized even the limited aid as risky meddling. Against Hitler, Blum denounced Nazi Germany and launched a major French rearmament program in 1936, supporting the League of Nations collective security. But he hesitated at the 1938 Munich Agreement, accepting appeasement to avoid immediate war-earning pacifism charges from leftists who wanted confrontation, and Bellicism accusations from conservatives who feared his stance would drag France into conflict. Toward Mussolini's fascist Italy, Blum opposed the 1935 invasion of Ethiopia through League sanctions and attempted diplomatic rapprochement to isolate Germany. But his non-intervention in Spain allowed Italian support for Franco to go unchecked, drawing similar split critiques: too passive for the left, too confrontational for the right. These choices, shaped by France's internal fractures, highlighted the dilemmas of a leader caught between peace and preparation, with consequences that echoed across Europe. Léon Blum's responsibility in France's 1940 defeat is often debated, but a balanced view shows it is neither greater nor lesser than that of other political and military elites between 1918 and 1940. The Front Populaire's social reforms, like the 40-hour workweek, may have temporarily slowed military production, and the non-intervention policy in Spain reflected a cautious diplomacy, criticized as appeasement. However, these choices were made within a broader context of internal divisions, governmental instability, and strategic missteps accumulated over 2 decades. The mediocrity of the military high command, unprepared for Germany's blitzkrieg, and the failure of successive governments to effectively modernize the army or counter Nazi aggression from the 1930s onward weighed just as heavily. Blum, like others, operated under the constraints of the Great Depression and European tensions. Blaming him alone, as Vichy propaganda did, is an unfair oversimplification. The defeat was a collective failure of French elites against a better prepared Germany. Léon Blum's Front Populaire, 1936-1937, shaped France's welfare state with bold economic reforms. Facing the Great Depression, the Matignon Agreements brought the 40-hour workweek, paid vacations, collective bargaining, and 7-15% wage hikes to boost demand and stabilize the economy. Nationalizations, like the Bank of France, directed investment toward public goals, blending socialist ideals with state control. This forged France's conservative corporatist welfare model, funded by payroll contributions, tying benefits to jobs and preserving social hierarchies. Unlike Britain's liberal model, With tax-funded, means-tested benefits that minimize state interference, France's was interventionist, shaping markets through labor laws. Britain prioritized flexibility. Bloom's reforms drove demand but risked rigidity. Sweden's social democratic system, funded by high progressive taxes, offered universal benefits and equality, while France focused on occupational privileges and family allowances, boosting consumption but segmenting labor markets. Germany's corporatist model, also contribution-based, was less state-driven, preserving status differences without Blum's anti-monopoly push. France's social spending, now 30% of GDP, reflects Blum's legacy of balancing worker protections with growth. Today's economic crises, high debt, inflation, slow growth, spark debate about the welfare state's role in developed nations. Critics argue it inflates spending, France's €1.4 trillion debt, year on 12% of GDP in 2025, raising taxes and stifling competitiveness. Rigid labor laws rooted in Blum's reforms can deter hiring and innovation. Supporters counter that welfare stabilizes economies by sustaining demand. France's consumer spending grew 2% in 2024, despite global downturns, while reducing inequality and labor unrest. Blum's model isn't the sole cause of crises. Global factors like energy costs and trade issues loom large. Yet its costs and rigidities are debated, while its demand-supporting benefits endure. In wrapping up our exploration of Léon Blum, it's clear that this visionary leader left an indelible mark on French history. As the architect of the Front Populaire, Blum championed groundbreaking social reforms that elevated workers' rights, introduced paid vacations and the 40-hour work week, and laid the foundations for a more humane welfare state. His commitment to socialism with a human face, his intellectual prowess as a writer and thinker, and his unyielding opposition to fascism, even enduring imprisonment under Vichy, cement him as a symbol of progressive ideals and moral courage. Blum's legacy endures in France's social protections, inspiring generations to fight for equality and justice. Yet, no assessment is complete without acknowledging his shortcomings, which mirrored those of France's entire political and military elite between the wars. On the economic front, the welfare state's ambitious expansions under Blum contributed to short-term inflationary pressures and production challenges, highlighting a broader failure to balance social gains with fiscal sustainability, a critique that resonates in today's debt-laden economies. More critically, in the face of rising Nazi threats, Blum's cautious diplomacy and the Front Populaire's internal divisions fell short of the decisive rearmament and alliances needed, exacerbating France's unpreparedness for World War II. These were not isolated missteps, but systemic flaws in a divided Third Republic, where appeasement and outdated strategies doomed the nation to defeat in 1940. Ultimately, Blum rises above his era's failures as a beacon of hope and reform. In a time of crisis, he dared to prioritize people over profit, reminding us that true leadership lies in bold action for the greater good. Thanks for joining this series. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's pivotal figures.